America was unique. It was marvelous. Its very founding principles are unique, and that's responsible for its immense success. But unfortunately, America is just an idea, and it's been replaced by the United States, which is just one of another 200 nation states that have spread over the whole world like a skin disease. So unfortunately, the US is no longer exceptional. It once was when it was America. And to me, America is an idea, not a place.
And we are joined at the sold-out Nomad Capitalist Live by the original international man, the author of Crisis Investing and so many other books, Doug Casey. Glad to be with you.
Thanks, Andrew. It's a pleasure to be here.
You had one of the best speeches. People were loving it. And you were talking about speculating. You were talking about opportunities today. My first question is, where do you see the world heading in a broad sense?
I think we're on the cusp of what I call the Greater Depression. And a depression is a period of time when most people's standard of living drops significantly. And right now, we're in the eye of the storm. The government has printed up, well, not just the US government, but all the world's governments, printed up trillions and trillions of dollars of currency units. And it's given people an artificial sense of prosperity. If we deposited $10,000 in everybody's bank account tonight, they'd wake up and think they were a lot richer tomorrow. Well, they wouldn't be. But they would go out and start buying stuff, and that would create a business cycle, giving all kinds of false signals to the economy. So I think we're at the cusp of something, actually, that's going to be the biggest disaster that we've seen since the Industrial Revolution. Not that that was a disaster, that was one of the best things that's ever happened in all of history. But these are very, very dangerous times. And this is just the lull before the storm. Right now, as we speak, we're in Indian summer, as it were.
So it's been over 4 decades since you wrote International Man, certainly influenced a lot of the things that organizations like Nomad Capitalist talk about. How is it more relevant? I imagine it is more relevant. How is it more relevant in these times today than it was back in the late 70s and 80s?
Well, it goes without saying the world has changed immensely since then. I mean, from a personal freedom point of view, I used to travel sometimes on my World Service Authority document issued to me by a guy who became a friend of mine, Gary Davis, who renounced his citizenship in Paris in 1946. He was a bomber pilot during the war. And I was able to use it successfully in a lot of countries. And more interestingly was when I used it unsuccessfully and was turned away and taken to back offices to be interrogated. Anyway, forget about that. That documents like that are of little use except as conversation pieces, because the world has become much more strictly regulated, and all passports today are government property that are all hooked up by computer systems, so they know where you are and what you're doing everywhere, as you're well aware. So personal freedom is increasingly being flushed down the toilet. And people ask me, well, why is that? And it's because everybody believes in democracy. And all these legislatures that meet, what do? They pass laws. And what do laws do? They tell you what you must do and must not do. So every day that passes, there are more of these laws that accumulate like the bottom of the Augean stables. And every law they pass has to be funded, so taxes go higher or money printing goes higher. And a new agency has to be set up to enforce it. So this is what's happening to the world at this point. And this is one of the reasons why I say we're going into the Greater Depression. On the other hand, this whole thing about internationalizing yourself is very important, because your biggest risks in the world today are not so much financial or economic, and those are huge, they're gigantic. Your biggest risks today are political. And the only way to get around them is to diversify politically, which is why, I have residences in 3 countries at the moment. And I suggest that everybody that's in a position to do that, do so. And if you're not in a position to do it, get into a position to do it.
Yeah, people say, I'm not ready. There's plenty of them that are pretty affordable. You don't have to go for the gold standard, but you should do something.
You've got to do something. And the problem is one of ethics and attitude together. People don't realize that, they treat the government as if it's a magic entity of some type. They don't realize that the government is an organization like General Motors or the mafia, which is a better analogy, that has its own interests. And they're antithetical to your interests, but still everybody treats the concept of the state with respect, which is very stupid. And they act as if they were plants. You're born in some country and you put roots down and you stay there. But acting like a plant is not intelligent for a human being. So a lot of people move up to the status of cattle. Most of them are, you're a good taxpayer. Well, actually, you're a milk cow at that point for the government. But if it becomes inconvenient, or if they feel like they need to do it, they'll transform you from a dairy cow, a milk cow, into a beef cow, which is not good. So, the whole idea is to break my attitude at this point is that this whole idea of citizenship is an anachronism and is destructive. I'm a believer in the rap laid down by Neil Stephenson in his book, Diamond Age, where he indicated that, correctly, that the nation states are going to cease to exist largely, I'd say within 50 years, and they're going to be replaced by what are called files. I don't know if you're familiar with that concept or not.
Tell us about it.
It's basically your real countrymen are not people that you share government ID with. They're people that you share ideas with, whatever's important to you, whether that's your occupation or your religion, or it can be 1,000 different things. In my case, any file, my most important file, as in phylum, way of organizing things in biology, for instance, is philosophy and attitude towards life. So I find that my countrymen can be in China or the Congo or Bolivia as easily as in the United States. So I think that's going to be a major change in the way the world is organized over the next several generations. Nation states out, files in.
In the meantime, you're from the United States. How do you see the value of U.S. citizenship, and how do you compare that, particularly in this current era, versus other citizenships? How do you look at that? Because I know you're by nature an American exceptionalist. Is that correct?
Well, let's put it this way. America was unique. It was marvelous. Its very founding principles are unique, and that's responsible for its immense success. But unfortunately, America is just an idea, and it's been replaced by the United States, which is just one of another 200 nation states that have spread over the whole world like a skin disease. So unfortunately, the U.S. is no longer exceptional. It once was when it was America. And to me, America is an idea, not a place.
When did that end, do you think?
It's a gradual process. It's funny that from the Constitution, or I prefer the Declaration of Independence actually to the Constitution, things actually started going downhill with the Alien and Sedition Acts in 1793. Then they overturned those. But, you know, the thing is, one of the few laws that I believe in is the Second Law of Thermodynamics, which is entropy, which is all about everything deteriorating over time. And that happens to good things like the US. And the war between the states, the Spanish-American War, which, you know, headed us off on the direction of empire, World War I, World War II, the Roosevelt regime, setting up lots of agencies. Well, the income tax and the Federal Reserve in 1913. But now, the US has transformed itself into a multicultural domestic empire, which is actually what it is now. It's not a country. It used to be a country even 50 years ago. So we're really on a rapid descent downhill, and it's going to wind up with something resembling World War III, probably following the acknowledged start of the Greater Depression. And so I think the U.S. is on really, really slippery ground. The immense amount of debt, which means some people owe a lot to a bunch of other people, and if they can't be paid, both parties are going to be unhappy. And I think the riots that we saw in the summer of 2020, I think we're going to see a lot more of those. I mean, we can talk about the economic situation, and it's very grim. And we can talk about the political situation. I mean, with the election of November 2020, I'm not a fan of Trump for many reasons. But he would have been vastly preferable to the Biden regime, because these people are actually Bolsheviks. And I say that because they're the same personality types exactly as the Bolsheviks in 1917, or the Jacobins in France in 1789, or the Red Guards in China in the 60s. You got these personality types. Government naturally attracts them because you got two.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, you got two kinds of people. You got people that like to control other people, and you got, well, people that like to control physical reality. They've created all the wonderful things we have in the world. And you got people that like to control other people.
Yep.
And those are the ones that go into government.
Why didn't you like Trump?
Why didn't I like Trump? Because he has no philosophical core. He's an opportunist. He's a business guy who flies by the seat of his pants. I mean, this is evident with the monetary policy that he promoted. He said, I'm a big debt guy. And the printing of trillions of dollars didn't start with Biden. It started with Trump. Well, it started before then, actually, with the financial collapse of 2008 when they started this. But Trump accelerated the policy. And he's a commonsensical guy in many ways. That's good. He's not an ideologue, which is good. Well, it's good if you're a capitalist libertarian ideologue. But
He wasn't good for expats either. A lot of the rules and tax changes and what have you.
You're quite correct.
Nobody seems to mention that.
No, nobody mentions that because one of Trump's big problems is he's an ultra-nationalist.
Yeah.
He's a jingoist, and they're very dangerous.
My impression that said, I don't want to wait for the next shoe to drop is, if this is what people want, and I agree with you on a lot of the capitalist stuff, you know, criticizing your people who want to live somewhere else doesn't seem like a very palatable thing to have.
No, it means that you're being treated like a government possession. Or, you know, that's...
If you don't come back and build the empire, as you said,
yeah,
we're going to turn against you or
Exactly.
make your life difficult.
But, you know, Biden and Harris and all these horrible people under them are much, much worse. And they're just getting started. And we can expect that once these rabid statists, these Bolsheviks, once they entrench themselves, they're not going to want to let go of the means of power. So I think they're going to be back in office, like it or not, for some time.
Probably for some time. I know you and Robert Kiyosaki, I think, are getting together. He said these guys are communists, they're Marxists. You said, I believe, they're fascists.
Yes, that's a word that is improperly used most of the time. Fascism is a system that was actually, formulated, crystallized by Benito Mussolini, and it's all about the melding of big business corporations with the state. And that's precisely what's happened in the U.S., where the big, powerful corporations have gotten bigger and more powerful, and they work with and feed into the state. That's what fascism technically is. Capitalism is a system, as Marx defined, where private property, both the means of production and consumer goods, are privately owned and privately controlled. In fascism, it looks like capitalism because these corporations are still privately owned and you can still have your house and all this type of thing, but they're state controlled. I mean, I've lived in Aspen, Colorado for many years. I don't own my house there. The county commissioners own my house. I can't do anything with it, I promise you, without getting permission from the local commissars. This is fascism. I mean, from an economic point of view. It's not a pejorative term. It's a technical economic description of a system.
When you call the United States an empire, it's become an empire. When you look at internationalizing, what do you look for in terms of finding a place that's perhaps the opposite of an empire?
Well, it's slim pickings in today's world. I live most of the time in Argentina and Uruguay. And look, one of the nice things about so-called third world countries is that the governments are much less efficient and much less effectual than in the U.S. And all of these third world countries tend to be actually much more corrupt than the U.S. The U.S. is still, among the good things about it, is it's still a relatively high trust society. There's not a lot of corruption, really.
You could argue spending $1 billion to run for president seems a little corrupt.
You're right. You're absolutely correct. You're absolutely correct. But in the U.S., it's generally dangerous to bribe a cop if he pulls you over. It's done all the time, but it's generally dangerous to bribe. You got to be careful to bribe most government officials. But in the third world, it's not only not so dangerous, but it's kind of expected. So the U.S. is moving in that direction, though, obviously. But that's a double-edged sword, because when you have all these laws, if you don't have corruption, and if they enforce those stupid laws, of which there are millions, well, you can't do anything. So corruption actually becomes a good thing.
You're saying in the U.S. it's hard to do anything?
Yes, exactly. We got all these laws, but it's hard to get around them. And in Argentina, we got all those laws, but you can get around them.
So you like it much better in Argentina, much better in Uruguay?
Yeah, despite the fact that Argentina's got a perfectly horrible government. I mean, they're an exemplar of stupidity on every level. Uruguay is somewhat better. But these countries, anything can change with the next election.
You said, though, in Argentina, you felt that at one point the government treated you as just some wealthy gringo, and all right, let him do his thing. We got other fish to fry. Is that a correct summary?
Pretty much. If you're not a citizen, you're owned by another government. So it gives you a little bit of insulation. You're a foreigner, they can kick you out. My Spanish is good enough for taxi drivers and restaurant workers, but I can't carry on a philosophical conversation in Spanish, so I can't rock the boat. And they're happy to have me there because I bring money and employ the people. And so, it's despite the fact that Argentina is very, very problematical. For me, it's a very pleasant place to be.
This is one of the things that people seem to bring up. Well, you don't have certain freedom of speech in some places. They'll mention Singapore, and I kind of wonder why would you want, out of all the places you could move, why would you want to move there and start protesting? I mean, it seems like to me that's why you're leaving. It's just to kind of float above someplace.
Exactly. I don't get involved in politics anywhere. I will make, philosophical ideas and concepts I have. I love to have those kind of conversations with anybody that'll listen. But I'm not trying to convert anybody. I'm not trying to convince anybody. So, I'm just, no matter where I can go, I can be a crazy, entertaining gringo from their point of view. And not threatening, because I'm not political.
What do you think about Uruguay?
Even though I'm an anarchist, I don't believe in the state.
What do you think about Uruguay, who came out and said, we're not going to raise taxes, or since you're there?
Well, let me say that Uruguay is very overrated in many ways.
Sure.
Tell you how stupid, well, I guess I can say this. I'll tell you how stupid the average Uruguayan is. It's a welfare state to start with. It's one of the very oldest welfare states in the world, which is a pretty unsound foundation. That's the bad news. The good news is there are only 3.5 million people, and it's basically a farming country. But
It's a lot easier to do that better than 350 million people now.
That's right. That's right. And actually, I was talking about corruption a minute ago, but Uruguay is one of the 2 least corrupt countries in Latin America, no question about that. But I'll tell you how stupid, well, Uruguayans are no more stupid than people everywhere. But about 6 years ago, I think, they had a plebiscite that voted in an income tax. I'm not talking about an income tax was foisted on them by a legislature. It was voted in by plebiscite. They voted to have an income tax put in. That's bad. And look, there's all kinds of things. You live in because the legislature, nobody's life or property is safe when the legislature's in session. Like one of the major things in Uruguay is tourism. My estancia is close to Punta del Este, which is kind of it's one of those 3 or 4 jet set places in South America. And so what did they do a few years ago? They passed a 0.00 tolerance drunk driving law. So you dare not, in a beach resort in the summer, you dare not have a drink. And they have checkpoints that are set up during the temporada, during the season, to arbitrarily test you. And you better not get caught. So there's all kinds of nuisances with Uruguay I can go on to. But they leave me alone, generally speaking. They do leave me alone, and it's pleasant and peaceful. You don't have to worry about the Frito Bandito or rebels. Although they did have rebels during the 80s, and the military government at that time, nothing like Argentina, where the generals probably killed about 20,000 citizens. But in Uruguay, there were probably about 500 that were disappeared.
If you were to do it all over again, would Latin America be the continent of choice?
Well, I'm a big fan of Africa as a speculator, as a kind of an entrepreneur, as it were, a political entrepreneur. Everything's so politicized there. But where would I go? Because I've lived in, 10, 11, 12 countries. I could count them up. And I visited 160, most numerous times. Basically been living outside of the U.S., living in the United States, out of the United States for the last 40 years. So would I go back to Latin America? Well, what are your alternatives? I mean, that's why, I kind of got into the hobby that I have that's related to this, which is visiting shithole countries and getting an appointment with the president or the military dictator or whoever.
How do you do that?
It's
For the viewers who want to get an appointment also.
Well, it's not easy if you're just a gulag off the street. But I'm fortunate in that over the years, because I've written a lot and I've spoken a lot, and wind up with, well, look, for instance, I've played polo, no longer do, but I played polo for 20 years. You say, okay, so what? I play golf, I play tennis. That's good. But polo is kind of a special sport, and in any country in the world where they play it, if I go to the polo club, I'm automatically one of the boys of, because these are the rich guys.
It's not exactly a low level.
Exactly. And so you meet somebody, you talk to them, and, you go home to dinner, you meet friends. And it's pretty easy in these countries.
A lot easier than meeting the President of the United States or something like that.
Yeah.
The guy's just hanging around, right? So you're going
exactly.
to these countries.
And there's always, like, for instance, I'm very interested in art, painting and sculpture. So that's something that people in these countries that are connected do. And go there, one thing leads to another. I mean, it used to be, I don't do this anymore, really, that I'd wander into the capital city of some place, don't know anybody, don't know anything. So I would open up the Yellow Pages, which existed in those days, and do two things. I'd go to lawyers, because they know everybody, they're absolutely wired if you go to the right law firm. And I'd interview a bunch of lawyers. They're happy to talk to you. Who knows? I might be a rich guy that can give them business.
Just throw them a retainer, perhaps?
No, not necessarily.
Don't even hire them?
No, I'm interviewing them
Okay.
to hire them. And if we get along, then one thing leads to another. And look, in Dominica, for instance, this is kind of an interesting story. I went there, and let me see, when did I go there first? Jesus. During the 70s sometimes, okay? And I met with this one lawyer, and we got along very well, just chatting. We liked each other. And I was telling him about what I did and what I thought. And he said to me, Mr. Casey, you ought to meet my brother Kenny. He's the director of the Industrial Development Bank. Little country, 60,000 people, has an industrial development bank. It's kind of quaint. So he sets up a dinner for me with his brother that night. And there we are in the restaurant. And we're talking. And Kenny's kind of suspicious of me because it's a black country and I'm a white guy. I might be a Uhuru jumper. And so we're blah, blah, blah talking. And this is where I really hatched the plan that became the centerpiece of my hobby of talking to guys that ran countries. And I told them about my radical plan, which I'd never pitched to a government before, of how they could basically turn their nothing nowhere country into Hong Kong on steroids very quickly. And what it would do is enrich every common man in the country, because we take all of the government's possessions. They had lots of crown land and the state this, the post, all these things would be put into a corporation and run for profit. But the shares would be distributed 70% to every man, woman, and child in the country, so they all profit from it at that point. And I was thinking, well, 10% would be put in trust for the next generation, so that people born in the next 21 years would also have an interest in it. And 15%, let's say, would be distributed to people that make things happen. So I said to Kenny, I said, that 15%, well, that might go to people like yourself, for instance. And I said, when we take, with the last 5%, when we take it public in New York, London, and Tokyo, there'll be warrants attached and warrants given out to people that are making things happen. And let's suppose that the stock goes public at $10, but you might have 1 million warrants at a penny. And I'm hoping that since he's the director of the industrial, he can do the math. And he thought about it for a minute, and actually more, thought about it for 10 minutes. And he came back and he said, and this is one of those things that somebody said that's burned into your mind. He said, after thinking about it for 10 minutes, "That's very interesting, Mr. Casey. Tell me more about those warrants." So I did, and I explained what we'd do. 10 minutes later, he went off and he called Eugenia Charles, who was the president of the country at that time. Remember, I was new in that country yesterday. He called Mrs. Charles, who became famous, incidentally, when the U.S. invaded Grenada. This is how we can tell when I was there. It was just before the invasion of Grenada. The head of the invasion force of Grenada was not Ronald Reagan. It was Eugenia Charles. She was the beard. She was the, for show. The U.S. always likes to see multinationals, so they got Dominica to act as when they invaded Grenada. So he went off and he called Mrs. Charles and set up an appointment for me with her the next morning. Now you're saying, well, okay, what happened then? Because part of my plan was to generate capital. There's more to the plan. I don't want to go into this whole thing, but was to sell economic citizenships. Nobody had done it before, to my knowledge. It was my idea, and I think Dominica was one of the first countries to do it. St. Kitts is the big one on the block now. So anyway, he set the appointment up, and then it turned out her father, who was very sick, died that evening. And of course she had to cancel all of her appointments. And like an idiot, I should have just camped out until the funeral was over. I don't know how many days that would have taken. And gotten the appointment. But since it was a spur of the moment thing, I said, I'll come back. Very stupid on my part. But then I thought about it. I said, wait a minute. Let's cookie cutter this mother and take the show on the road. And then I did this in 10 other countries, never with success, but always with really interesting consequences. I mean,
What are the countries on the hit list now?
well, I did Ciskai after Dominica. That was very interesting. And of course, it no longer exists as a country. It's been subsumed into South Africa. Suriname. I spent a month down there, and that was a hell of an adventure. Palau. Went there a couple of times. Most people don't even know that exists as a country. Vanuatu.
Kiribati?
No, I mean, if I'd taken this seriously and made the rounds, that certainly would have been another place. But
some of these countries, you can't even send them a letter. You're like looking at the FedEx list. It's nowhere to be found. You got to go there.
No, you're right. I mean, they actually have no right to be members of the United Nations. Not that the United Nations has a right to exist, quite frankly. But, now Haiti, since I've got some pretty good connections there, so I hope to see Mr. Martelli sometime in the next couple of months while he's in New York, because I've been to Haiti many times, and I don't particularly like going there. It used to be a delightful country when Papa Doc was running it. A lot of problems. We could talk about that. But now it is absolutely the bottom of the barrel. But, I'm going to pitch him on this plan, and basically I'll say three things to him. What I'm going to tell you will make you a legitimate billionaire. You don't have to steal money. Oh, that's interesting. Number two, the people will all love you because you're not just tossing them some table scraps. You're giving them ownership of it. And of course, all the land titles and everything are just a nightmare there. So these things can be straightened out. And three, I'll put you on the front cover of every magazine on the planet in a favorable light. You can be the person that took the worst shithole country in the world and transformed it. And, it'll be an interesting conversation, a fun conversation, but it won't work. And I can tell you reasons why it doesn't work.
What do you think about the guy running Rwanda? That's the country they talk about in Africa. What are your thoughts on him or others in the region?
Well, I don't know what to think about Rwanda because, as we know, it was 20-some years ago when These people killed 500,000, 1 million, who knows, people with machetes. So are the underlying causes of that disaster still lurking under the surface? I suspect they are. But, I've come to hate travel because it's gotten much, much worse with this COVID hysteria. But it really got bad with the war on terror. I mean, it used to be that, if you could run to the airport and get on the plane before they pulled up the jetway, you were cool. Now you got to be there 2 hours before. Your papers have to be in order. So
even in the 90s, you just walk anywhere you want. In the airport, you just go hang out for the day.
Yeah.
Now it's
No.
dreadful.
And I'm afraid it's going to get worse because, the elite in the world, the people that are represented by, well, things like that idiot in Davos, Klaus Schwab. I mean, I can understand. They don't want the hoi polloi cluttering up St. Mark's Square in Venice and, being bumper to bumper in Machu Picchu. Let these plebs stay in their little villages and live like serfs. So I think the people that rule the world would really like to clamp down.
And you probably experienced this. How many times you go to, I remember Moldova, as I'm slipping and sliding. You can't get dropped off at the hotel. You're walking 2 blocks because there's that agriculture convention, and all the agriculture ministers have come there, and they need I'm sure more people know you and I, even in Moldova, maybe, than know these guys from Tajikistan, the agriculture minister, but they're also self-important.
They're very self-important because they're high government officials, which to me means that they're among the most unworthy and worthless people in the world. But they like being big shots, and they like lording it over the serfs.
You said Janet Yellen wasn't fit to work at a deli.
That's true, and she's not. She's got no understanding of economics at all. She's an embarrassment. But hopefully the economy collapses. I think it will while she's in office. And she'll be blamed for it. Much of it will be justifiable. But I'm not looking forward to the collapse of the US and therefore the world economy. And the reason for that is that when things get bad and people start losing their houses and kicked out of their apartments, once the, what do they call this, where they don't have to pay their rent and mortgages?
The moratoriums.
Yeah, on payments. When that comes to an end, they're going to owe back mortgage payments. That's a debt that's not going to go away. And you're actually going to owe back rent to the landlord who needs it.
A lot of people are going to be shocked.
They're going to be shocked. They're getting this big bill. Most of them have pissed away their stimmy money. And they're going to be out on the street living under bridges. The government won't let that happen. No. So the government will have to print trillions more to bail them out. But here's the problem with the Greater Depression. It's that as highly politicized as the world is right now, they're going to want a savior. They're going to want somebody who's going to come and say, let's punish the people that made this happen. Undoubtedly, he'll be one of them. But let's punish them, and I will straighten things out. And it's the same argument that Mussolini made, same argument that Hitler made. And it works.
To me, the problem in the West in particular, though, is, people think Jeff Bezos made this happen, or Elon Musk made this happen. They happened to be in the right place at the right time to profit more than usual. But that, to me, is the problem, that people think that.
Yeah, I'm all for captains of industry that create real wealth. It's shameful that during the greatest era of growth in the US, people like Carnegie and Rockefeller and Vanderbilt and Astor, they're called malefactors of great wealth and robber barons. This is criminally stupid. These guys created industries generally in those days without any government help. Of Of course, they're always happy to get help from the government. Yes, of course. But they actually created something. And Bezos, I mean, I'm sure he's been corrupted by the fact that a major source of income for him with his computer is the government and so forth. And, you know, Musk, of these people, I have the most respect for, I think. You know, he gets lots of help from the government. So it's corrupting. The government should have zero involvement in the economy, zero. But, you know, instead of that, people look at it as being a cornucopia. So
you mentioned where is there to go? Your thoughts on Europe? Is the EU sustainable?
No, it's absolutely going to fall apart. And that's a very good thing. But it goes further than that, because not only is the EU going to fall apart, but just as Yugoslavia broke up into 6 republics, Soviet Union broke up into 15, I think what you're going to see is Italy break up into, I don't know how many.
The balkanization of the rest of Europe, Western Europe.
I think so. People forget that it was only like 1871 when Germany came together from scores of principalities and dukedoms and kingdoms. And Italy, when was Garibaldi? I guess that was the 1850s. When Italy became that's going to break up to Spain, the Catalans,
Catalonia,
the Basques.
And finally break away, yeah.
Yes, and it'll be a good thing. And, you know.
They have all the wealth.
Well, actually, yeah, that's right. That's right, they do. Much more productive than the rest of Spain generally. And then, of course, England, Scotland should break off. Maybe Wales, too. I mean, this is.
You think the same thing happens in the U.S.?
Yes, I do. In fact, it's worse in the U.S. because we're likely to have an actual civil war. And not like what happened, the unpleasantness of 1861 to 65. That wasn't a civil war, incidentally. That's a total misnomer. It was a war of secession. And a civil war is one where 2 or more groups are contesting for the control of one government in one land area. That's a civil war. A war of secession is just where one group wants to separate from another group. So the Civil War in the U.S. wasn't about slavery. It was really about economics, but that's a whole different story. But yes, I think we're heading towards a real civil war this time, because these people in red counties and blue, they hate each other. They can't talk, cannot communicate. They think each other's evil, and it won't end well.
From an internationalization standpoint, would you want to be a citizen of a Western European country?
Well, if I was a citizen of it, I wouldn't want to live there, because you're much freer, as you know, living outside of the country who issues your slave card to you.
Do you think at some time Italy or Germany or Belgium says, you know, we're going to do what the U.S. is doing. We're going to start taxing people. You have to pay something.
I think that's on the way. All these organizations like the IMF and the OECD and the UN, they're all the same, and they're all going for tax harmonization, they call it. So yeah, although the U.S. is now the only major country that you can't get the monkey off your back, I think they're all going to go that way until they fall apart.
And so what would you do if you were in that situation?
Well, you get the best passport you can because you unfortunately need your papers in order to do anything. So in the meantime, don't live in the country that taxes you. You can still do that if you're a European. So that's the first step.
It seems to me that there's this great fascination. One of the things I'm trying to talk about here is if you can get rid of 5 or 10 countries from your life, the U.S. and Canada and Australia, New Zealand, you can live a pretty free life, whether it's Argentina, Uruguay, wherever else. That's a hard thing for a lot of Westerners to do, is to say, I need that European citizenship so I can go to Canada, for example. And it seems like those are all the countries that are falling apart.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. But there's no solution for this, because it's a psychological problem with human beings, a spiritual problem almost. where they like to boss other humans around with, and they're looking for a daddy figure called the state that will keep them safe, and it's all a chimera, it's all a lie. But this is one of the good things that you're doing with this organization that you started, Andrew.
Well, I appreciate it. Last question is, if you were starting all over again, what would be your plan? Where would you want to live? Where would you want to be speculating?
Well, where would I go now, today, if I was 20 or something again? It starts with education, and I misallocated 4 years of my time and a bunch of money going to a university. And today, universities are much more corrupt and leftist. They're totally run by Marxists. It's horrible. And I speak as somebody that was a trustee of the 10th oldest college in the country, so I actually got into it. And it wasn't nearly as bad then as it is now. I would unschool myself. My next project, after I'm writing these novels, 3 of them are out: Speculator, Drug Lord, Assassin, tracing the pilgrim's progress of my hero, Charles Knight. There's 4 more novels to come. But along with those novels, I think the next one I'm going to do may be entitled The Renaissance Man, which is going to be a guidebook to educating yourself. What should you do during high school, and especially during college, and for those, let's say, 4 or 5 years after you're out of college, so that how do you qualify yourself? What should you do? Where should you go to learn everything you need to go out and conquer your own world? Okay, that's kind of a preface to answering your question. Where would I go today? I would definitely go to Africa because, like I said before, I think I said it before, I want to go someplace where it's an on-level playing field. I want to go someplace where my skills and education and background and capital, hey, there's 100 million guys like me in the US and Canada. We all have the same kind of background. But if I go to the Congo or Nigeria or Central African Republic, I'm unique. I can bring things to their party that are needed and wanted, and automatically, get clocked into the top.
So rather than going and working on an offshore oil rig or working in Nome, Alaska, as some of these guys do to make money, you'd say, I'm going to go somewhere that's maybe not so pleasant to live in, but I'm going to start a great career and make a lot of money.
Especially as a young guy, because there's an infinite desire for goods and services on the part of every human being on this planet. Everybody wants to have a nice house, a nice car, so forth. So, you can't do that for them, but you can go to these places and you can figure out, what can I bring to these people through my, what everybody has in the West, but they don't bring it here. So that's what I would do if I was a young guy today. Qualify myself. You just can't be, a guy that goes there and hangs around, can't bring anything to the party. But after you qualify yourself, which you should do by the time you're in your early 20s, that's where you want to go. That's the part of the world you want to go, in my opinion.
Africa's the place to live if you're just starting out. Not forever, maybe?
No, I don't see it as a good place to live particularly, no.
Go there, do business, get out.
That's the way I see it, because it's very unstable, and I think it's going to become more unstable. And let's admit it, when it comes to convenience, the U.S. and Canada and the EU are very convenient. You get everything you want.
Dubai, Singapore.
Right, exactly. But like I said, I want to go where I'm in an on-level playing field that's tilted in my direction. Everybody can benefit that way. So that's what I would do.
Good advice. On-level playing field.
Key word.
Doug Casey, great to have you.
Thank you, Andrew.
So people ask, Andrew, how do I get the most out of Nomad Capitalist? How do I begin my Nomad Capitalist journey? The first thing people do is they start right where you're at. They watch YouTube, they listen to podcasts, they read articles at nomadcapitalist.com. We've spent years creating thousands of pieces of free content so that you can get the vibe from someone who's actually done this, from someone who's actually been in your shoes. What they'll do next, they'll get a copy of the book. You can find it on Amazon. It costs a few bucks, and while it's not going to give you all the secrets, it's going to, again, give you more of the vibe. You're going to learn a lot of the things that I've learned. You're going to learn some strategies you can employ, and you're going to get a lot further in your journey. From there, if you are the 7 or 8 figure entrepreneur investor, you can go to nomadcapitalist.com. You can click Become a Client. We're pretty busy these days, but we have availability to help a limited number of people who want to create a holistic plan, something that I think is so important. So if you want to do that, go to nomadcapitalist.com, click Become a Client, learn more about how it works and how we can help you.